The best and brightest commanders of each orders were dubbed leaders, taking charge of their respective orders and coordinating between each other to serve as the command layer for the orders as a whole. Most of these orders were built out of the bones of pre-existing organizations, but such restructuring for new purpose takes time and effort, and in the interim, the leaders used their own resources and connections, seeking out artifacts to further magnify their own power that they might fight at the level of the Legion. The warrior, in between getting sandwiches for Odin, sought out twin greatswords, made for Titanforge to wield, lost some time ago to Helya. They were able to seek out Helya's champion and claim both blades from them, one of them being even further imbued by Helya's rage, making them the war swords of the Valarjar. Speaking of the Vrykul and Helya, the Tomb of the Old Kings held many Titan-forged weapons, one of which was of particular interest to the warrior, a shield formed from Deathwing's scales, buried with an old Vrykul king lost to Helya's treachery, the Scale of the Earth Warder. Word reached the warrior's ears of Twilight's Hammer remnants that had focused on a lake in Tirisfal. Journeying there, it was discovered that they had broken into Tyr's tomb, seeking to awaken the Cathraxi Zakaj, the very creature Tyr sacrificed himself to destroy all those years ago. As it happens, in the wake of the Troll Wars, the great king of Erethdor had sought this tomb too. He had died to the same Cathraxi threat, but injured it sufficient with his greatsword, the finest human make, enchanted with the energies of their newly forged elven friends and bathed in the blood of many trolls. The warrior took this greatsword, Stromkar the Warbreaker, and slew Zakaj once more. The priest heard the same information about Twilight movements, but arrived a little bit later, finding most of the cultists dead at the warrior's hands, save for a few, including one who was wielding a small dagger that spoke to him. The dagger betrayed him, cleaving instead to the stronger mind of the priest, revealing itself as Xal'atath, Blade of the Black Empire. Xal'atath's history is long and studied, and we still don't know the full truth of its reality, save that Xal'atath speaks to the creature bound within the blade, not the weapon itself. Xal'atath would spend much of the Third Invasion aiding the priest against the Legion, but never stopped whispering in their ear. Interestingly enough, its first act was to absorb Zakaj, removing him from the board and preventing any further resurrections. This accomplished, the priest journeyed with the mage to the Nexus. The two were summoned there by Kalikos in an attempt to rescue Azyrgos, again, from the remnants of the Ethereum. As it happened, the Ethereum had stolen two artifacts, and were using their unstable nature in an attempt to rend reality and merge with the void. A task they succeeded at, but sadly for them, both priest and mage claimed their weapons and turned upon them. For the priest's part, they took Light's Wrath, a staff the Scarlet Crusade had crafted gone berserk, thanks to Balnazar's interference. Wrath and blade in hand, the priest journeyed with several members of the Illidari and the Silver Hand to the blasted world of Niskara. Niskara was the Legion prison world, one-time home of the wandering Draenei before they were found by Kil'jaeden. They almost didn't escape that particular hideaway, save for the sacrifice of a Naaru to Ure. As the group freed many captives throughout, they caught the attentions of the Eredar Inquisitor, who was wielding the Naaru itself, forged into a fell staff of void power. And yet, as the priest channeled more and more holy light into the combat, the staff soaked it in like a sponge. And just like Ka'ada back in alternate Draenor, such an influx of light sped up the Naaru's natural life cycle, rebirthing it into its true form and engulfing the Inquisitor in purging light, choosing the priest to wield it hence. Now the Warlock was no stranger to the dark powers they tempted daily, and they knew they would need to do what the others could not. To this end, they first sallied south to the Deadwind Pass, seeking out the Dark Riders. The Riders continued their charge of gathering artifacts, despite Medivh being long dead, and the Druid and the Death Knight also accompanied the Warlock, both seeking their own relics under Rider care. The Dark Riders were still empowered by Medivh's fell magics, but were no match for 3 leaders, and were slain. The trio claimed their prizes, and for the Warlock this was Ulthalesh, the Deadwind Harvester. This was a nightmare device built by Sargeras himself, specifically designed to absorb souls of demons, in order to turn upon those who dared betray him and his crusade. The price for its implementation was whoever wielded it would always have to fight that very same pull themselves, lest they be consumed. Intel reached Warlock ears that the Nathrazim Mephistroth wielded an ancient skull as he pursued Legion agenda in Felsol Hold. The Warlock chose cunning. They contacted the skull prior to facing Mephistroth. There's an old rule of magic in Azeroth, which we haven't really talked about yet, be it undeath, void, or fel. If someone or something willingly submits, it can be stronger. If you have to force servitude, it is weaker. So the Warlock convinced the skull of the benefits of siding with them instead of continuing to be dominated by Legion lieutenants. The skull betrayed Mephistroth, revealing itself as Thal'Kiel, one of the original Eredar warlocks from eons ago. Thal'Kiel and Warlock combined caused significant damage to Mephistroth, forcing a retreat for now, and the skull willingly served alongside his new ally. With these in hand, the Warlock was ready for the real goal, the Scepter of Sargeras. This was the very stave Ner'zhul used at the conclusion of the Second War to shred Draenor into Outland, a staff created by literally forging portal magic into a solid construct. This is also the very stave Sargeras used to summon forth his avatar into Azeroth 855 years ago, and the artifact Kil'jaeden used to help summon himself through the Sunwell 6 years ago. Even now, Gul'dan had retrieved it and sought once again to wield its dimensional powers in Legion service. Thankfully for us all, the Warlock was able to infiltrate Gul'dan's ritual. I mean, one Warlock's the same as the other, right? Stealing away with the stave and claiming it for themselves. The Shaman found an artifact in an unlikely place, in the possession of one of the Loa of Pandaria, Zwen, the White Tiger of Strength. The twin claws were imbued by the Keeper Ra, and were used to breathe life into the Mogu Titanforged, lost after the battle against the Black Empire and their minions. Zwen had recovered them and, wisely, realized they should only be unsealed in time of uttermost need, and only to those worthy. Zwen held a tournament, as was his style, where the Shaman had to best several foes, including Chen Stormstout, all seeking mastery of the claws, and ultimately saving them from demon robbery, as the Legion interrupted the tournament, as was their style. The fists of Ra-Den crackled with the power of the Shaman's command. But destruction was not the Shaman's only forte. They heard stories of a scepter, crafted by the once elven queen Ashara, sought by the Earthen Ring for its power over healing waters. The Shaman willingly strode into a trap in the Throne of Tides, alongside Aranak Stonespeaker, who was none too pleased to be back here. The trap sprung, they pushed through it to destroy the Naga laying it, and thus with nothing preventing them, they claimed Sharasdal, Scepter of the Tides. There was one last artifact on the Shaman's minds, one of the most legendary artifacts Azeroth had ever seen. Actually, it's an artifact from Draenor, and held an ancient prophecy which, in brief, stated that a stranger will raise it high, and with it justice shall reign. This is the weapon Thrall received from Orgrim as a teenager, and which failed him during the battle at the Broken Shore, and again as he fought near the Maelstrom. The weapon fled his holding, plunging through the rift into the elemental plane of Deepholm. Thrall, Stormcaller Mylra, and the Shaman, pursued it therein, seeking Therazane's aid and blessing in its pursuit. They bested the demon seeking to master the mace, and it found its way to the Shaman, and not Thrall. Unsure and uncertain, Thrall accepted this turn of affairs, and the Doomhammer remained in the Shaman's possession henceforth. The rogue, no stranger to subterfuge, was sought out by the half-orc assassin Garona to deal with some rogue demon cultists in Duskwood. It turns out virtually all of the Night Watch of Darkshire had converted, though Morgan Lattimore would be proud, as his daughter Sarah Lattimore was not among them and in fact fought against the cultists. Her defiance ended up aiding rogue infiltration, as they had discovered this particular cult was better positioned than previously thought, and was posed to assassinate the newly crowned King Anduin in Stormwind. Garona and Rogue sought SI-7 assistance, but Matthias Shaw, SI-7's leader, was strangely unhelpful. With or without him, they were able to root out the cult and escape unscathed, leaving with the Kingslayers, which Garona bequeathed to the Rogue. The Bloodsail Buccaneers had lost one of their best fleets to twin swords of Legion make, crafted by Talgath himself, Velen's one-time friend from fonder days. These blades drained the blood of wielder and target alike. Cursed to corrupt the corruptible, they were specifically sent into pirate hands. Pirates the late Dalen Proudmoore hunted down and, at cost, destroyed, although the blades survived. Unearthed by the Cataclysm, their siren call summoned the Bloodsail fleet and claimed them in its cold grip. It is this cursed fleet that cut off both Horde and Alliance convoys and reinforcements from the Broken Shore, contributing to the catastrophe that battle descended into. The rogues' intel connections were second to none, and it is this connection that sent them after the cursed Bloodsails, slaughtering what was left of their fell forms. The rogue was hesitant to wield the Dreadblades themselves, but they were tremendously powerful Eredar artifacts, and if ever such strength was needed, it was now. But the Dreadblades were not the only Legion artifact the rogue had their eye on. Sargeras had a fondness for hounds that goes back millennia, and one of his favorites was Gormaw. Now, the creature died on some long-forgotten world, now obliterated for the slight, but its fangs endured as potent weapons, molded by Mephistroth himself. Sargeras would not allow just anyone to wield his prized pet's maw, however, and so stripped the will of an Eredar assassin until she had no mind of her own, incapable of refusing or refuting commands. She was then infused with the souls of thousands of killers, forging her into the ultimate infiltrator. The rogue's contacts had been aware of this for some time and had finally tracked her down to her netherbound fortress, outmaneuvering and then assassinating the assassin. The fangs of the Devourer passed to the rogue. The Paladin was not idle, of course. They were just a bit slow, arriving at Tyr's tome a bit behind the warrior and the priest. Zakaj was long gone, erased by Xal'atath, but the darkness it left still oozed over the tomb. The Paladin, aided by allies, cleansed much of what was left and retrieved Tyr's personal weapon, the very silver hand the knighthood was named for. With its removal, the tomb collapsed in on itself, giving Tyr his final rest at long last. Coincidentally, their next destination was another one the warrior had graced, the Tomb of Old Kings, wherein they contested against the souls of the Vrykul within, including the very one who helped build Tyr's tomb. This old king had spent the last of his life waiting for one to prove worthy of the armaments and, in passing, remained still in service, his soul bound to his charge. The Paladin succeeded where all had failed, taking hold of Truthguard and Oathseeker. These were crafted by Arcades himself, blessed with a literal piece of both Tyr and Ironaya, to imbue it with their essences to empower and protect. Thusly bolstered, the Paladin pilgrimage to the tomb of Uther the Lightbringer, whereupon they communed with half his soul to learn the impossible. Tyrion still lived. Immediately, the Paladin took all their mobilized forces to the Broken Shore and charged into a demon stronghold, wherein they found Tyrion being tortured in an attempt to lure the Paladin in. This was a trap, you see, as one of the elite of the Nothrazim, Balnazar, was once again seeking light-bound minions to pursue his own goals. Balnazar invited the Paladin to claim Tyrion's greatsword, the legendary Ashbringer, forged from a Naaru core, making it powerful in both light and void. But this itself was the trap, as Balnazar claimed the Paladin's mind, seeking to wield them as he had Dathrahan and corrupt the Silver Hand from within, turning it into a new Scarlet Crusade. Fortunately, the Paladin was not Dathrahan and resisted the Nothrazim's influence, forcing the bastard to flee, swearing revenge. Sadly, Tyrion Fordring, tormented by Legion and tortured as bait, finally passed from this world, peaceful, as he knew his legacy would carry on in one worthy of the task. Tyrion's body was laid to rest at Light's Hope Chapel within light-blessed soil, in honor of his legacy and his sacrifice. It is hoped that, after a lifetime of service, Tyrion would be able to rest at last. Meanwhile, in the past, the mage journeyed with the priest to the Nexus to combat the Ethereum. The mage and priest became separated as they fought against their void-drunk foes, but the mage was here with purpose, the legendary creature, Aluneth. Aluneth is an arcane entity, but beyond that, not much is really known of its origins. It is known that several people across Azeroth sought to use and tame it, including the Guardian Egwin, to little avail. The mage conferred with Aluneth, taking a page from the Warlock's book and bargaining rather than dominating. Aluneth agreed to be wielded by the mage and assisted their priest ally against the Ethereum. The mage was reached out to by the displaced Sunreavers and their leader, seeking re-entry to the Kirin Tor after the purging of Dalaran. As proof of their sincerity, they were offered both the location and ownership of one of their most ancient weapons, a sword wielded by Dathramar Sunstrider himself during the War of the Ancients. Unfortunately, the weapon had been lost in the sacking of Quel'Thalas and claimed by the first Lich King as a trophy, and so it resided still within undead hands in the melting fortress of Icecrown. The mage, hesitant to return, nevertheless portaled into the Dread Citadel, whereupon the third Lich King immediately detected them and thundered into their minds. Now, the third Lich King was no friend of the Legion, and was busy preparing his own warriors to combat the invasion, so he tolerated the mage on the proviso that they were on their own, and, if they fell, they would join him in undeath. Fortunately, the mage was successful, and Felo'melorn was theirs once more. The Sunreavers returned to the Kirin Tor fold, and promptly assisted the mage in their next endeavor. The first guardian of the Kirin Tor wielded a staff. Unlike many of these artifacts we have listed so far, this staff was not forged great, but instead grew with each holder who held it, as it was tradition for the staff to be passed down from apprentice to apprentice across first generations and then centuries. Right up until about the First War, when a cunning Eredar, the mage hunter, managed to trap and ensnare its current holder, claiming the staff in the process. The mage, realizing value in the circumstance, decided to recreate the trap and willingly walked into it that they can reverse the ambush and restore the staff, Ebonchill, to Azerothian hands. Now, the druid had a lot of work to do. Fortunately, their first task was the easiest. The Scythe of Elune, the very weapon that resulted in the Curse of the Worgen, had been claimed by the Dark Riders some years ago after the outbreak in Duskwood. Alongside the Warlock and the Death Knight, the druid bested the riders and claimed the scythe, wielding the unstable power of Goldrinn in perfect balance. Now, Shaman was one of the original Loa of Azeroth, originally a young panther, imbued by the Keepers, who kept to herself prior to fighting and dying in the War of the Ancients. Like Gorma before her, the panther's fangs were removed after her death and imbued with her unbridled perception, becoming twin daggers protected for centuries. Until the Legion's coming, of course. Now, unlike the fangs, the claws were crafted devices, built by the Keeper Freya as a part of a set for the two Bear Loa of old. Both died in the War of the Ancients, but after proving they were capable of handling the Titan augmentation, the druid drifted into the Emerald Dream to find the claws, though within they discovered something horrible. Long dormant, taking advantage of the Legion's distraction, the Emerald Nightmare had surged wildly out of control, claiming huge swaths of the dream and corrupting it. The forces of Nightmare sought the claws as well, and Ursoc chased after them alongside the druid, recklessly, for this was a trap for the Loa himself. Xavius, now styling himself the Nightmare Lord, showed his hand and claimed Ursoc as his prize, leaving the druid to take the claws of Ursoc and flee back to the waking world. Realizing the renewed need for the healing powers of balance, the druid quickly sought the last branch of the first tree, Gahonir, working alongside the archdruid Narlex, and this time better prepared with greater stealth, the druid stole back into the dream to find the branch, which the Nightmare was working to corrupt with all haste. The druid stole it away to the waking world and took it to the Well of Eternity, defended by fellow druids as they cleansed the branch in its arcane-blessed waters. Note, this is not the first time arcane energy has been used to cleanse corruption, and it will not be the last. The hunter first sought a spear of many blessings, imbued with the power of dozens of different Loa over the centuries, crafted by Tauren in times long past. This spear was lost to a magically corrupted Nightsaber. The hunter had to employ all their tricks and traps to survive this monstrosity, for they're masked by the foul mists of Helya, but managed to retrieve Talonclaw in the end. While there, they ended up journeying after the Paladin to the Tomb of the Old Kings, where an ambitious Vrykul sought what she believed to be a legendary item that would allow her to ascend as the God Queen. And, okay, fair enough, but the device was in fact the first firearm of Azeroth, built millennia ago by the Keeper Mimiron, imbued with the power of storms, entrusted to Thorim's care. It had found its way to the tomb via a particularly foolish Vrykul who sought to wield it as God King, which fell apart immediately. Appropriately enough, the hunter hunted down the latest foolish Vrykul, who kept charging the gun until it exploded in her face, killing her and nearly injuring the hunter, but Thorim's wolf Hati leapt to their defense. Hati's soul was bound to the hunter and stored within the rifle, Titanstrike, saving the warg's life. New companion at their side, the hunter and Hati were approached by Verisa Windrunner, who came with unusual news. Rumors of Illyria, her sister long lost after the tumultuous end of the Second War, out on the Legion prison world of Niskara. Now, Niskara's inquisitors were buzzing after the previous incursion, and thus were completely unprepared for Verisa and Hunter charging through. Verisa was made reckless by hope of her sister's presence, but unfortunately she did not find her sister within, but she did find Illyria's personal bow, Thas'dorah, forged by elven make and imbued with the power of the Sunwell itself. Verisa bequeathed the bow to her hunter ally, for the time being, and resumed the hunt for her lost sister. The third Lich King was using his instantaneous psychic connection to those undead to serve as something of an information hub for the entire planet, helping to coordinate Legion resistance. It is from this that the Death Knight learned of both priest and hunter incursion into Niskara, and followed suit. In direct reaction to these recent assaults, one of Kil'jaeden's personal enforcers was loosed upon Niskara, to pursue invaders and punish defenders alike with a terrifying great axe, the Maw of the Damned. This axe was cursed with the soul of its creator by Kil'jaeden, and suffered the same fate as the now-deceased Terengar Gorefiend. It drew power from souls, which caused its ceaseless hunger. Simply holding the weapon took tremendous will. Tremendous will was something of a requirement of the Ebon Blade in general, and the Death Knight in particular. As if to further test this, the third Lich King tasked them with finding the broken pieces of Frostmourne. The Death Knight took them and reforged them into something new. Not quite the equal of the Primus's handiwork, these twin swords nevertheless had to be tamed by the Death Knight, as they contained echoes of those who came before. After these tasks, it was almost a vacation when the Druid and the Warlock sought their aid in raiding the Dark Riders of Deadwind. While the trio made quick work of the Dark Riders, the Death Knight felt a blade of power they had placed in a position of reverence, the great sword Apocalypse. Apocalypse was one of those crafted by many hands artifacts, forged and reforged by generations of Notherzim for single purpose, to psychically imbue paranoia and fear, not only in its wielder, but in all around it, as was their penchant. With all of these great feats and acts of strength, it should come as no surprise that the monk had to perform the most difficult task of all, brewing a drink. Oh, and they had to defend the Temple of the Jade Serpent from demon attack. Presided over by Yu'lon, the Jade Serpent of Wisdom, the monk managed what monks did best, and Yu'lon, in her gratitude, bestowed upon them Fuzan, the Wanderer's companion. Crafted by the Keeper Freya from the very first tree to grow on Azeroth, based on the prototype of Gahanir in the Emerald Dream, it was entrusted to Yu'lon, and, after a brief stint in the Monkey King's care, now found purchase in the monk's steady hands. While still on Pandaria, the monk visited the Terrace of the Endless Spring, where Taran Zu and many of the other Shadowpan were struggling against yet another Legion assault. With the monk backing them, the group pushed back the Legion and faced down the very Titan-blessed waters themselves, morphed and mutated by fell influence. Therein they claimed Shaelun, the Staff of the Mists. This stave was once used to help free the Pandaran from Mogu domination millennia ago, and was wielded by Xiao Hao himself when he parted Pandaria from the Sundering and veiled it in the mists. The monk had one last errand to run. The young Lili was bored, and sought adventure, so the monk agreed to chaperone her. The two stumbled into Oldham, and a renewed air elemental invasion. More than a little curious, the duo journeyed into Skywall. If one remembers, Skywall was rife with political infighting even before they lost their elemental lord, and in that power vacuum ceaseless civil war had raged. One of the more clever djinns had claimed a pair of old Titan-forged artifacts, twin weapons crafted to contain the power of Al-Akir himself. In this task they had failed, obviously, but they did snatch a small bit of his essence, and the djinn wielded them as proof of his mastery of air and his right to rule. This might have even worked out for him, had he not then immediately launched a renewed invasion of Oldham. The monk and Lili put the djinn down, leaving yet another power vacuum in their wake, and claimed the fists of the heavens for themselves. Now the demon hunter, the Slayer, didn't really fit like the other leaders did. The leaders had been companions and comrades for years now, knew and worked one with another, as well as with the many peoples of Azeroth. Absent this advantage, the Slayer sought their own methods of empowerment, and instead focused their effort on their own fallen. To this end, they invaded the Broken Shore in search of two ex-demon hunters. The first was Veritas Fellsoul. Veritas, if one remembers, was one of the Illidari's prized pupils, betrayed by Altruis the Sufferer and slain by the adventurers 6 years prior. Veritas' soul was sufficiently demonic at the time for him to reconstitute in the Nether, where he was claimed and turned by Kil'jaeden. He, alongside Karya, were gifted warglaives which they wielded for their demonic masters, something the Slayer was rather desirous of. The treacherous ex-demon hunters did survive this encounter, but the Illidari had their prizes. First, the Eldrachi Warblades, some of the only surviving pieces of the old Eldrachi people, one of thousands of species lost to the Legion's crusade. They had been a Spartan people, totally devoted to their military conquests, and had been deemed perfect servitors of the Legion. This proved inaccurate, as the Eldrachi resisted the Legion to a number and died as one before their onslaught. The Warblades were built out of unique crystals from their lost world, capable of siphoning off scraps of souls of the enemies they injured without sinking too deeply into the soul hunger that so plagued Terengar and the Maw of the Damned. The second were the Twin Blades of the Deceiver, weapons designed to channel the power of their last surviving demon lord, Kil'jaeden. While one might think that, given Kil'jaeden's history, these would be corruptive weapons, instead it was the quite opposite. Wielding them directly magnified demonic power, something Veritas had relished and the Slayer utilized. Freshly equipped with artifacts and victories, the leaders journeyed back to their respective orders to finish organization and preparation for the many campaigns that lay ahead.